What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Karina. I also want to welcome you to a new series I'm doing on this channel. It's going to be a podcast style, and I'm titling it Radical is Relative. This is episode 1, and I'm going to be talking about white privilege. Before I get to talking about white privilege more at length, I want to say Black Lives Matter. All of them. Black women, Black trans lives matter, Black non-binary conforming folks matter, Black folks that are suffering from homelessness matter. All Black lives matter. In order for Black lives to truly matter in the US, especially in the broken and corrupt criminal justice system, white folks, we must be willing to talk about our unearned privilege and the role that we play in systemic racism. And by doing so, we forfeit some of our privilege. By calling out white supremacy, I am not losing my seat at the table. I am simply recognizing that everyone at the table looks like me, and that is not reflective of the United States. It is time for people of color to be given a seat. My ancestors and I have had our time at the table, and giving equal opportunities is really long overdue. It really is. If I chose to, and many white folks do, I can go on in my life without ever thinking, caring, questioning, problematizing how Black people are mistreated in this country. It's part of how white privilege operates covertly. White folks, including myself, have the privilege of being so distance from experiencing racism that we are afforded the luxury of learning about racism. And that's a powerful statement. White folks, we get to learn about racism. We learn about racism in books, on the nightly news, on social media, from our Black peers and friends. But the bottom line is, it's something that we can learn. Tamir Rice never had to learn about how state-sanctioned violence disproportionately targets Black bodies. Tamir Rice didn't have to learn how Black folks in this country have to live in fear that one day their Blackness will be reason enough for a police officer to shoot them and kill them. Tamir Rice is an example of it, and he was 12 years old when he was playing in a park in Cleveland, Ohio, when a white cop, within minutes onto the scene, shot and killed him. 12 years old. Because of the Tamir Rices, the Philando Castiles, the Eric Garners, the Michael Browns, the Sandra Blands, the Breonna Taylors, the Elijah McClains, the George Floyds, it becomes white people's, our responsibility to recognize when our actions and inactions contribute to white supremacy and thus the ongoing injustices that Black people experience. It's our job to do the work, to acknowledge and recognize that whether we are intentionally doing it, it is the impact. For us white folks, it can be extremely hard to pinpoint what exactly we have due to white privilege. But what's so fascinating and powerful about white privilege is that it's in every crevice of our lives. That's what makes it so insidious, that it's hard to determine what we have actually achieved due to merit and what we have achieved due to hundreds of years of having a head start in oppressing groups of people so that we can gain more power. White privilege looks like you getting the job that you're from your dad's recommendation. White privilege looks like getting a warning when you're getting pulled over for speeding. White privilege looks like getting a slap on the wrist when your Black friend got suspended for the same offense. White privilege looks like seeing myself as the heroine in popular movies and not just the best friend. White privilege looks like inheriting generational wealth. It's everywhere around us, and it's important to call it out when we see it. So now I want to kind of shift gears and talk about how I navigate my own whiteness. And I want to start by focusing on how my perspective has shifted over time. As a teenager, I knew that there were systems in place that protected my whiteness and simultaneously criminalized Black people. I knew that institutions were designed to bar BIPOC out of having equal opportunities. I knew that colorblindness was a harmful myth that negated BIPOC's real experiences as a person of color. I knew that racism was alive, but I also thought of it as this problem that kind of loomed over society, that I was born into, that I somehow benefited from but did not partake in. What I did not understand is that my ignorance upheld and maintained white supremacy and thus the social devaluation of Black lives. I was not anti-racist. I was taking everything that I was getting from white privilege without any regard to the consequences of my actions. And what's wild is that I never actually realized how privileged I am until I was 18 years old, sitting in a sociology course that focused on race in the United States. And I was a freshman in college, sitting there, and my professor exposed me to a very popular piece, and it's Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Now, if you've never read this is a white woman wrote this in, I believe, the 80s, and she goes through, I think, 50 items. They're just all things that she realized as a white person are the daily privileges of being white. And I remember reading it and having sort of this visceral reaction of shame and guilt. And I always had thought of myself as someone that was progressive and pretty far left. And I had this moment where I realized how I fit into the racist society that I never had thought about before. I never had to think about it before. And I think that's the important part, is white people can truly live their life without ever even thinking about race in a meaningful, constructive way. So I'm going to read you a few of Peggy McIntosh's points in her literature piece. I'll also link it down below, but before I even read it, I do want to call attention to the fact that this is in no way a radical piece of literature, and reading it and grappling with it and reflecting on your white privilege after reading it is the bare minimum. And it's a pretty elementary school approach to it, but if you're just getting started and working toward becoming an ally, I think it's a good resource. Okay, so she titles this, The Daily Effects of White Privilege. Number 1, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. 2, I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. 3, if I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. 4, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such location will be neutral or pleasant to me. 5, I can go shopping almost most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. 6, I can turn on the television or open a front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. 7, when I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. 8, I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. 9, if I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privilege. 10, I can be pretty sure of having my voice heard in a group in which I am the only member of my race. 11, I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group where he or she is the only member of his or her race. 12. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented, into a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit my cultural traditions, and into a hairdresser's shop to find someone who can cut my hair. 13. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not working against the appearance of my financial reliability. 14. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. 15. I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. 16. I can be pretty sure that my children's teachers and employers will tolerate them if they fit school and workplace norms. My chief worries about them do not concern others' attitudes toward their race. Reading that and understanding that I unknowingly fit into the fabric of United States racist society was a really aha realization, wow moment for me, and realizing that there's so much privilege that I have that I could be 18 years old and still learning new ways that I'm privileged. And while many of those are huge topics, like making sure that you're not discriminated against when trying to find housing, wow. Having a neighbor that is not going to be racist toward you, being told that your ancestors built the world around you in school. There was one, and it said something to the effect of, I can find a Band-Aid that matches my skin tone. And for some reason, that particular one out of the list of 50 daily effects of white privilege it so resonated with me. And I think it's because I realized that I had gone my whole life where nude matched my skin color. Now, there's no way that nude could match any one person's skin color because nude isn't a color. There are a multitude of colors of skin. How could there be one color for nude? And I remember just thinking about how every time I had a Band-Aid on, it blended in with my skin tone. And it goes from small things like that, from the concept of a nude bra to a nude Band-Aid, to never having to explain to your children the effects of systemic racism. It goes from minute details in your life to massive details in your life. And after I read this, I decided to read more books that were written by authors of color. I decided to look more deeply at the world which I was so comfortable living in and really think about my place in it and how can I learn and unlearn. White people rely so much on Black people to inform them how we unknowingly oppress them and have oppressed them. It is not their job to inform you how you're being oppressive. We must listen and we must be reflective and go forth being better than our ancestors have been. So I saw a post on Instagram by the @name Barbara Smith, and these are common reactions that white people give when talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and protesting and things of that nature. So I'm just going to kind of read the posts and just talk a little bit more about it. So one common response is that white people like to complain about demonstrations and protests. And the post says, you don't get to choose how an oppressed group expresses their anger and frustration. And I mean, say that. Yes, we have no right to insert ourselves in something that's not about our liberation or our freedom or the fact that we are the oppressor. And one thing is, I think protest works. There's been change affected by the amount of people that are enraged and out in the streets for George Floyd. There has been legislative change. Has there been enough? Has there been enough accountability? No. But When Colin Kaepernick kneeled, people hated him. He never was playing on the 49ers again. So rather than calling attention to don't loot, don't riot, it's not safe. How is that helping? How is that productive? You're destroying your city. When they're peaceful, you say they're being disrespectful. When they take a more active approach, you condemn them for being violent. I saw a video of a Black woman and she was saying, "We learned violence from you. You taught us this violence." And that is so true. We live on a land that we stole violently. Then we violently enslaved an entire race of people and considered them not human beings, and they're not allowed to be angry about it. I mean, come on. The next one is saying things like, "I'm embarrassed to be white." This doesn't actually add anything to the conversation, and it falls into the white guilt category. If you want to stop being embarrassed, then it's time to have tough conversations with your white family and friends. Now, this is a good one too, because I personally can relate to saying that. I'm almost positive I've said that. It's embarrassing to be white. This is such a cop-out response because oftentimes you say this, and I've said this when I'm just uncomfortable talking about race. And if you feel uncomfortable talking about race, I urge you to consider the term white fragility. It's a noun. It was coined in 2011, and the definition of it is the discomfort and defensiveness on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. So if you're white and you feel threatened by Black Lives Matter, it's likely because Black Lives Matter threatens the strength of white supremacy. Those who shift Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter epitomize white fragility. The country is being confronted with evidence of police misconduct and police brutality, and we must acknowledge that it's targeting Black folks in particular. So when we validate Black Lives Matter, we are also actively validating white people's role in Black people's oppression. So saying that you're embarrassed to be white, you're acknowledging to some extent that there is a history of violence, but you're not willing to go any further, and you're not willing to be an ally, really. You're just uncomfortable. So I think about white fragility and start to try to reflect. So the next one is unwilling to reflect. No one is perfect, and we all make mistakes. What's important is that you learn from them. By refusing to look at problematic past behavior, how can you expect to grow? This is a good one too, because there's no way in your life you have gone and not said something prejudiced or racist, laughed at something prejudiced or racist. There's no way that you have not internalized racist ideas and racist stereotypes. There's no way. I mean, it's everywhere in the media. If you've said or done something that you now feel badly about, you have been influenced by an extremely racist society, and that doesn't excuse you, and you don't get to just walk off and say, well, I'm glad that I'm not the only one. You have to start to wonder where you got those ideas from. Why were they okay then? Why are they not okay to you now? And how can you get to a place where you are willing to call out racist jokes or racist comments when you hear them? And that's kind of where I am these days, is that it's very easy for me to sit here and make a video explaining all of this to you, but when I have a family member say something that's tainted with racism or is overtly racist, it's really hard for me to be like, so what exactly did you mean when you said that it's ghetto? Or, this comment made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Can you talk to me about that? I know that that is way easier said than done, but it becomes easier every time that you do it. And remember that language is important and words matter. The next one is the refusal to be uncomfortable. Racism is pretty uncomfortable, and BIPOC have to deal with it on a daily basis. It pales in comparison to the discomfort that comes with changing your ways. Keep that in mind before you complain. And I think I've already kind of talked about the comfortability aspect, and I think that there can be a lot of unwillingness on behalf of white folks to have the tough conversations and to really look inside themselves and question where they have privilege. But it's messy and it is uncomfortable, but really it's the only way that we can go forward, and the work starts within you. Before you can raise the voices of BIPOC or take to the streets and protest for Black Lives Matter, it all begins within yourself. And how can you be more anti-racist today than yesterday? So this is the last one on Barbara Smith's post. Silence. This is the worst of all. Why are you telling the BIPOC you associate with in private that you agree that change needs to be done and then doing nothing publicly? If you can't find the right words to say, I'm sure BIPOC has said them. You can share, repost his stories, and retweet things you agree with as the minimum. And minimum is in all caps, and I like that because, for example, on Blackout Tuesday, I saw so much performative activism where they just posted a black square, pat themselves on the back, felt like they did something for the Black Lives Matter movement, and then forgot about the conversation and the problems at hand. And reposting all of that is truly doing the bare minimum, because it did not require you to do any learning, or maybe a little, but being silent during times like this is to be complicit. White silence really truly is violence, and there's so much privilege within the choice of being silent, because this is not a difference of political opinion. It is 100% a humanitarian issue. People are being killed due to their race, and to sit back and do nothing is to validate that what's normal in contemporary times is okay, and that you do not see problem with the way that Black people are mistreated in this country. Black people have been saying that their lives matter. It's white people that are new to the cause, and we are the ones that need to join in force and say Black lives do matter, and just for once use the power that a white voice holds to affect change, to not just leave it to Black people to resolve the problems that we and our ancestors have created for them. I 100% agree, do not be silent. And I know a lot of white folks that remain silent not because they don't care, but because they're so worried about being politically correct that it keeps them from engaging in conversation at all. They're like, do I say African American? Is colored outdated? What's the difference between Black and African American? And I just want to tell you that Google is free 99. There's no excuse at this point to shy away from conversation because you're worried about the terms that you're using. Read about it, learn. However you're going to do it, it needs to be done. And it needed to be done yesterday. And I want to talk about another thing that I actually was listening to Code Switch earlier, and there was this podcast. It's called Why Now, White People, and it was calling attention to the fact that there is a way more integration in this movement, in this go-around of protesting a Black man's death, and why that is. And it was highly interesting. They also pointed out the striking similarities between George Floyd's death and Eric Garner's death. Eric Garner, I believe, was killed in 2014, and he his final words were almost the exact same as George Floyd's. I can't breathe, pleading for his life. And why did Garner's death not yield the amount of rage that Floyd's did? I mean, almost the exact same thing occurred, and yet one has yielded so much conversation about race, while moderate white people are just getting introduced and feeling comfortable joining Black Lives Matter. This has been going on for far longer than you have just decided to pay attention. All that we can do is continue to call out racism, is to continue fighting for every Black life, even the ones that are not caught on camera. Continue to do the work, continue to show up, continue to listen to Black and brown voices, and be better than yesterday and the last generation, and fight for legislative change. And as we all know, legislative change does not result in immediate social change. It just doesn't. But there has to be laws put in place that don't allow this to continue to go on, because it's abhorrent. It's more than I can even express into words what a social problem this is in the United States. We have just continued to reinvent ways to kill and harm and use Black people, and the time just needs to be up. So I hope that today on Radicals Relative, episode 1 on white privilege, you have either learned something, unlearned something, or decided a way that you're going to reflect. But I know that you can do it. I know that you can have self-reflection. I know that you can have tough conversations with family and friends. We can all do it, and we can all do it together. If you have any topics that you want me to talk about, race, sexism, Black Lives Matter related, possibly, please leave them in the comment below. If you finished this video all the way through, comment down below, Black Lives Matter. That's what you should comment down below if you finished all the way through. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here on Radical is Relative. And I will see you in the next one. All right. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the bell notification so that you know every time that I upload. All right. Bye, y'all. I hope the universe loves you today.